Deja vu. Think back to the last time it hit you and ask a strange question. What exactly were you remembering? Because you couldn't name it. There was no scene, no date, no story, just the certainty that this had happened before. Maybe it was a stairwell in a building you'd never entered, a friend's kitchen, a waiting room, and for a second or two, everything fit. The angle of the light, the hum of the room, the exact place your hand landed. Here's the thing that makes it eerie, rather than simply wrong. You knew the entire time that you had never been there, and the feeling didn't care. It sat there, insisting, right next to the fact that flatly contradicted it. Then it drained away, and you moved on. But that little glitch is one of the only moments you ever get to feel your own memory working, and catch it making a mistake it cannot take back. Next time it happens, you'll know exactly what to listen for. And the strange thing isn't really the familiarity, it's the timing. That feeling of having stood here before doesn't arrive instead of the truth. It lands on top of it, while some steady part of you keeps insisting you have never been in this room. Ordinary misremembering doesn't feel like this. Mix up a name, and one version simply wins while the other quietly loses. Here, neither side gives an inch. You are wide awake, holding two opposite beliefs at once, and refusing to drop either one. That double state is built right into the name. Déjà vu is French, and it means, plainly, already seen. The phrase caught on through a French researcher writing about the experience, and it stuck because it describes the sensation precisely, not the reality. So the working definition is oddly exact. You feel you have lived this moment before, and you know at the very same instant that you have not. The sense of remembering is loud. The when, the where, the how, nothing. A verdict with no evidence attached. Holding two opposite convictions at the same instant sounds like one system breaking down. It makes a lot more sense once you learn that the part of your mind doing the recognizing was never really one system at all. Because recognizing something feels seamless. You see a face, a street, a song's first 2 seconds, and the knowing just arrives, whole, in one piece. No steps, no sense of machinery turning behind it. But when psychologists pulled recognition apart in the lab, it didn't come apart into steps. It came apart into two separate jobs. In 1980, a psychologist named George Mandler named them familiarity and recollection. Familiarity is the rough one. It answers exactly one question, have I run into this before? And it answers with a feeling, a strength, a warmth, no when, no where, no story attached to it. Recollection is the detailed one. It hands back the surroundings, the time of day, the room, who was standing there, what you were holding. It doesn't just say yes, it shows its work. Normally, the two fire together, and so fast that you never notice the seam. The feeling lands, the details land right behind it, and the details vouch for the feeling. Recognition, arriving as one smooth thing. Two jobs, though, mean two things that can move independently. Researchers still argue about how cleanly the split runs, but on this much they agree. The familiarity reading can climb all by itself, with nothing following it. Two dials, not one. You have already felt those two come apart, probably in a grocery aisle. Someone glances over, nods, and something in you says, I know that person. Instantly. Absolutely. And then nothing else arrives. No name, no place, no idea whether it was last month or 9 years ago. Just a strong, wordless verdict of before. That is the rough gauge reporting in, and a gauge only ever gives you one reading. So you start digging. Work? The gym? A neighbor 2 apartments down? Your kid's school pickup line? That rummaging is the slower system. Pulling open drawers, hunting for a time and a place to pin the feeling to. Sometimes it lands. The dentist's office, 4 years ago, the receptionist with the loud laugh. And notice how it arrives. Not as a feeling, but as a whole file at once. Time, place, context, all bundled together. And often it never lands at all. You walk out still faintly certain, still unable to say why, which raises the obvious question. If the fast signal cannot tell you anything useful, why does the brain keep it? Because speed is the point. Safe or strange, seen before or brand new, that answer is worth having in a fraction of a second, long before the details load. A rough yes beats a perfect answer that arrives too late. With that stranger in the aisle, though, something real is buried underneath. You did meet them once. The gauge was right, just vague. Déjà vu is what happens when that same gauge fires, and there is nothing underneath it at all. You step into the room for the first time. The tile, the hum of the lights, the angle of late afternoon sun through the window. Genuinely new, all of it. And the familiarity reading comes back high anyway. So your brain does what it always does next. It reaches for the details. When was I here? Who was I with? What season? What shoes? What was I carrying? That request goes out on its own. You never decide to send it. Usually something comes back. A hallway attached to that room. A voice. A smell. A terrible meal, a year. Enough to close the loop, and the feeling settles down into an ordinary memory you can date. This time nothing comes back. Not a blurry answer. No answer. The sense of having lived it is strong, and yet the time, the place, the context are uncertain or flatly impossible. There is no earlier version of this moment to find. That mismatch is the whole engine of déjà vu. A familiarity signal ringing at full volume for a scene that was never filed away in the first place. An alarm going off with no record behind it. A failed search, on its own, is nothing. Your brain reaches for a name and comes up short a dozen times a day, and you barely blink. Déjà vu doesn't get filed away that quietly, because something else in the system speaks up. Call it the checker. It doesn't deal in feelings. It deals in facts, and the facts are blunt. You got off a train in this city 2 hours ago. You have never once stood in this room. So it rules the familiarity false. Most memory mistakes never get that hearing. You're certain you locked the door. Certain that conversation happened on the phone. You stay certain, and nothing inside you objects. Wrong feelings usually walk straight through as true. But rejecting the feeling doesn't switch it off. The verdict lands, the facts are settled, and the familiarity keeps humming underneath the whole thing, exactly as loud as it was a second earlier. So you stand there, holding both at once. The certainty that you have lived this exact moment before, and the certainty that you have not. That isn't a false memory. That's a standoff, and you're hearing it from the inside. For most of us, that contradiction shows up unannounced, lasts a few seconds, and refuses to come back when anyone is watching. Which is a problem, if you want to study it. But there are people for whom it arrives on a schedule. A seizure, at its simplest, is a burst of disorganized electrical activity spreading through brain tissue. When that burst begins in the temporal lobe, the region tucked in behind your temple, just above the ear, it does not always start with shaking. It often starts with a feeling. Doctors call that opening stretch an aura, and it is not really a warning before the seizure. It is the seizure's first seconds, experienced from the inside. And among the most commonly reported of those auras is déjà vu, the same certainty that this exact moment has already been lived, sitting right next to the knowledge that it has not, reported again and again by the same person. That is what changed things. A fleeting private oddity became something with a cause you could point at, in a place you could name. Diagnosing temporal lobe epilepsy leans on recordings of the brain's electrical activity alongside imaging of the tissue itself. And the implication there is quietly enormous. If a burst of electricity in one small region can manufacture the whole sensation of having lived a moment before, then that feeling never needed a real memory behind it. It only needed the signal. And those seizures did something more than give researchers a pattern to study. They put people on operating tables, because when epilepsy won't answer to medicine, one option is surgery. Find the small patch of tissue where the storm begins and take it out. In Montreal, a neurosurgeon named Wilder Penfield built his career on that operation. But he had a problem. Brain tissue is maddeningly uniform. Looking at it tells you almost nothing about what any particular corner of it is doing. So he operated with his patients awake. The brain itself has no pain sensors. Numb the scalp, and a person can lie there talking calmly while their own cortex sits exposed under the lights. Then Penfield touched it with a mild electrical current. Touch one spot, a hand twitches, touch another, a lip tingles. But when the current landed on the temporal lobe, patients reported something of a different order altogether. Not a twitch, a voice, a scene, something with the unmistakable texture of a memory. By most accounts, those responses were the exception, not something he could summon on command. But they settled something huge. A vivid sense of the past could be switched on from outside, by a wire, in a moment that contained no past at all. So what was that current actually touching? Go in from the side of the head, just above and behind the ear, and deep inside the temporal lobe sits a curled ridge of tissue roughly the shape of a finger. The hippocampus. Its job is binding. A moment arrives in loose pieces, the light, the voices, the smell of wet coats, and the hippocampus stitches those pieces into one episode you can later pull back whole, with its when and where still attached. Wrapped snugly around that ridge is a collar of cortex, the tissue nearly every incoming signal passes through on its way in. And it does simpler work. It deals in single things. This face, this doorway. Met it before or not? Which means the two halves of recognition are not scattered across the brain. They are neighbors. The rough sense of having met this in the collar, the full episode in the ridge, wired together and just far enough apart to be knocked out of step. A seizure does not have to sweep the whole brain. It can start as a small patch of cells firing together in the wrong rhythm. And when that patch sits in the collar, it can shove the familiarity signal out the door all by itself. And here is the awkward bit. That signal arrives with no return address. Nothing downstream can tell a familiarity flag raised by a genuine match from one raised by stray electricity. It reads as true either way. So the feeling is not dug up from anywhere. It is manufactured, right there in the tissue. And the ridge next door, the part that keeps the episodes, has nothing to hand over that matches it. Not everyone thinks the familiarity signal has to misfire at all. There is a rival explanation that needs no faulty circuit, no stray electrical hiccup. It says the machinery is working perfectly. It is just running slightly out of step with itself. A single glance does not travel to one place. The same scene gets carried along more than one route at once, and those routes do not all run at the same speed. Usually the copies land close enough together to fuse into one smooth moment. But if one copy arrives late enough, the brain has already logged the first pass. So the second reads as a repeat, like a bad phone line echoing your own voice back a half beat later, and for a moment you swear somebody else spoke. The trouble is proving it. A lag that small is almost impossible to catch in the act, and the strange feeling often lingers for seconds, far longer than any tiny delay. So the timing idea stays a plausible suspect, not a settled answer. Timing is one way to fool the familiarity gauge. Geometry is another. Because a place does not have to be the same place to feel like one, it only has to be built out of the same parts, arranged the same way. A hotel lobby you have never entered, but the ceiling height, the placement of the elevators, the angle of the reception desk, the flat gray carpet, those pieces have all crossed your eyes before in some other building on some other trip. So the fast familiarity check does its job, honestly. It matches the shape of the scene, shrugs, and reports back, yes, seen this. Researchers who study this idea sometimes call it gestalt familiarity, familiarity to the overall layout, not to the specific room. And the original room? It stays locked away, too ordinary to have been filed with a time and a place. You get the echo without the source. The room rhymes with something you cannot name, which is exactly what the eeriness is made of. That rhyming room keeps the original memory locked away. But something else usually rides along with the jolt. Not just the sense that you have been here, the sense that you know what happens next. The next line, the next turn of the hallway, and that hunch follows a kind of logic. If you have already lived this, then the next few seconds must have been lived too. So the knowing runs out ahead of you. It does not arrive as a memory. It arrives as confidence. So researchers have put that confidence on the clock. Build a déjà vu-like moment in a lab, freeze it, and ask the simple question, which way does the corridor turn next? People feel certain. By most accounts, their answers land no better than chance. The prediction, it turns out, is mostly stamped on afterward. The moment plays through, and the feeling of having called it quietly attaches to whatever actually happened. Another feeling wearing the costume of a fact. Sincere, insistent, and pointing at nothing. So that certainty about what comes next never survives a test. And for most people, none of it matters much. Déjà vu shows up for a few seconds, a handful of times a year, wobbles the room, and then quietly hands the room back. But there is a version that does not behave like a blip. It arrives weekly, sometimes several times a day. It does not fade politely after 2 seconds, and it can land with enough force to stop somebody mid-sentence. And it rarely travels alone. By most accounts, it brings company, a rising sensation climbing out of the stomach, a smell nobody else in the room can find, a wave of fear that has no cause, a few missing seconds afterward. That cluster has a name in neurology. It is an aura, the opening moments of a focal seizure. Abnormal electrical activity firing in the temporal lobe before it spreads anywhere else. The familiarity is not a stray signal. It is the seizure's first move, which is exactly why a neurologist wants to hear about it. Diagnosis leans on recordings of the brain's electrical activity and on scans. And an aura like this helps narrow down which patch of tissue is starting the trouble. The same feeling. A shrug in one life, a map pin in another. And a gauge that can read too high can also read too low. There's an opposite glitch, rarer and stranger, where something you have known for years suddenly feels foreign. The French name for it is jamais vu, never seen. You may have brushed against it while filling out a form. Write one ordinary word over and over, and somewhere around the 5th or 6th time, the letters stop looking like a word at all. Just shapes, somebody else's handwriting. Your own front door can do it. Your own hand, held up under a lamp. Nothing about the object has changed. What changed is the quiet verdict your brain normally stamps on it, without asking you first. So the slip runs in both directions. A familiar feeling attached to a brand new room, or the feeling stripped away from a room you have crossed 1,000 times. Same gauge. 2 ways to be wrong. So the dial can slip either direction, and either way, what slipped was a feeling, which points at something we almost never notice about ourselves. Most of what you call remembering never announces itself at all. It just arrives, already believed. Your whole ordinary day runs on that quiet arrival. Your keys are where you left them. That voice down the hall belongs to your neighbor. No evidence gets presented. Nothing objects. You simply proceed as if the matter had been checked. That is the curious part. Déjà vu isn't your memory breaking down. It is the one moment the checking gets loud enough to feel. A room you have never entered, insisting otherwise, down to the light and the sound, and that strange unease is quality control, working. Everybody has one of these. Some price, some object, some rule you walk past every day and quietly wonder about. Drop yours in the comments. I read them and they turn into episodes. Subscribe and the next answer will find you, because there is always a reason why.